Well, the Trump administration is still challenging the election results in Georgia, asking for a recount. You may recall they already had a recount. This comes after the state's Republican governor and Secretary of State certified its results on Friday. President-elect Biden won Georgia by more than 12,000 votes. So for the very latest on where things stand in Georgia, let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter LaCrai Mitchell, who's been covering the newest developments in the Peach State. So we already know there was a hand recount, LaCrai. What's the argument from the Trump campaign? And didn't, Georgia do it right the second time, and perhaps the first time too?
Well, the Secretary of State's office in Georgia would definitely say that they did. And what we saw over the weekend is that the Trump campaign put out a statement calling for this recount, which is well within their right because of the state law allows that when a race is within 0.5%, a recount can be requested by the candidate that received less votes. In this case, that is President Trump. And so the campaign is saying they're looking for a, quote, honest recount this time around. And they said that cannot happen unless signature matching takes place and what they're calling other valid safeguards. The thing to remember here is, like you said, Anne-Marie, there was a risk limiting audit that already took place where effectively there was a hand recount in the state because every ballot that was cast for the presidential election in Georgia was recounted again. And we have seen the Secretary of State's office come out last week and say that the results from that recount did affirm what was already determined on election night from those preliminary counts, which was that President-elect Joe Biden won the state. And so now what we have is the Trump campaign, like I said, asking for this recount. And for them, the signature matching is a really important key to this.
Right. So the recount is sort of an automatic thing based on Georgia law, and so the Trump campaign is basically arguing, you just recounted a whole bunch of bad ballots anyway, so that's why we want you to take a second look. And you pointed out that signature matching is kind of the key issue here. Republican Governor Brian Kemp has even said that it's something that the state should take a look at. I want you to talk about this signature matching issue, how they do it in Georgia, what is being suggested is wrong about the way they do it in Georgia.
So here's the thing to remember, that when it comes to absentee ballots in the state, there is already a two-step verification process that happens. And so what the Secretary of State's office is saying is that we have already gone through this verification process to make sure that these signatures were correct. And as a matter of fact, at this point, because of the process in the state, once these signatures were confirmed, after they've gone through this two-step verification process, the ballots were separated from the absentee ballot envelopes in order to maintain secrecy of the votes. And so at this point, you can't then go back and rematch up what's already been separated. What the Trump campaign is saying is that without having some sort of signature matching, there is this possibility of illegal votes, is what they're calling it, being considered. Now, what we heard from Republican Governor Brian Kemp on Friday is he made a proposal that the Secretary of State's office should go back and match up signatures that are on absentee ballot envelopes with signatures that they have on file in their records and those with absentee applications. I have not heard of the Secretary of State's office considering this any further, and of course we will be keeping tabs on this as it continues to develop, but it's my understanding that at this point we have passed a place where you can go back and signature match. But again, it's important to mention there was already this two-step verification process that took place. So the Secretary of State's office feels like they've done their due diligence on this matter, and that what the Trump campaign is calling for isn't necessarily feasible at this point.
Okay, so while the Trump campaign is focused on the presidential election that happened already, everyone else, particularly the GOP party, is focused on these two Senate seats that are coming up for a runoff race, right? We have 4 candidates going for these 2 seats. One of the candidates, an incumbent, Republican Kelly Loeffler, says that she is quarantining. She tested negative for COVID-19 Sunday after testing positive 2 days before. What is the latest on her condition, and what is the latest on the condition of these runoff elections?
Sure. So according to a campaign spokesperson for Senator Loeffler, she took 2 COVID tests on Friday morning and her rapid test results came back negative. And so she was cleared to attend campaign events that she had on Friday with Vice President Mike Pence and with Republican Senator David Perdue. During this rally, they had a couple of rallies on Friday, as a matter of fact, and she was cleared to attend those. However, after those public events on Friday, she was informed that her PCR test was positive, and so Saturday morning she retested, but those results came back inconclusive. And so what we saw yesterday is that the campaign then released another statement saying that she tested negative for COVID-19 in a new PCR test, and that she's going to continue to quarantine and follow CDC guidelines. And this, of course, comes, just as Senator Rick Scott of Florida confirmed that he had tested positive for coronavirus. Of course, that was after he had returned from a campaigning trip earlier in the month. He came into contact with someone here in Florida, and so he too was quarantining at the time. The state of the race in this highly anticipated Senate race is going to be something that we continue to watch, and that's going to continue to develop. I will say, important dates to keep in mind is that this runoff is going to take place on January 5th, and so the voter registration deadline is December 7th, with early voting beginning in December 14th. And what we've continued to report on and will continue to report on is just how these different candidates are now, in some ways really joining forces. You have Senators Perdue and Loeffler on the Republican side, and then the Democratic challengers, John Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock. They're putting out all stops because now the goal is to rev up enthusiasm so that they can get their supporters to come out during the holidays, right after the holidays, to cast their ballots in this race that is going to be consequential.
Yeah, the thing about it is people are just so exhausted when it comes to politics now, so it's a big lift to keep them engaged. I think it's sort of interesting that we haven't heard much from the president on this race, and we know he loves to chime in via Twitter or other things often, but haven't heard anything from him yet, so we'll be watching. LaCrai, thank you so much.
Thank you.